It was a blistering summer afternoon in rural Georgia, and the relentless sun beat down upon the sprawling complex of Altera Foods, a colossal agricultural processing facility that stood like a giant sentinel amid endless fields of cotton and corn, the machinery humming steadily in a rhythmic chorus that mirrored the industrious pulse of the workers who had come from miles around to keep the plant operating at full capacity. The air was thick with heat, and the sharp scent of oil and earth mingling with the occasional bursts of dust kicked up by passing forklifts and the faint chatter of employees moving through their tasks with practiced efficiency. But all that peace shattered abruptly when a loud metallic clank echoed harshly through the cavernous factory floor. The sudden screeching halt of Conveyor 4, sending a jolt of panic through the room as supervisors and technicians rushed over to assess the problem, knowing full well that this vital piece of equipment was the backbone of the entire operation, carrying thousands of pounds of freshly harvested produce every hour, and any downtime meant costly delays and angry clients. CEO Richard Holston, a sharply dressed man in his mid-50s with an imposing presence that commanded attention, was making an unannounced visit, ostensibly to motivate the workers, but more accurately to inspect the plant's efficiency firsthand. And as he strode purposefully through the maze of machines and conveyor belts, his face tightening into a frown at the sight of halted activity, he noticed a young black girl nearby, no older than 16, wearing faded denim overalls and a worn cotton shirt. Her dark curls pulled back loosely as she swept the dusty concrete floor, her expression calm but focused despite the commotion around her. With a sharp bark, Holston pointed his finger and demanded, "You, stop standing around, go fix that machine." His tone brusque and dismissive, the room instantly falling silent as all eyes turned to the girl, whose name was Naomi, a summer helper from the nearby farming community, quietly helping her family make ends meet, but never one to be underestimated, though she held no official role as a mechanic or engineer. Naomi met his gaze steadily, unruffled by the sudden command, and replied evenly, "I'm not a mechanic, sir, but I know someone who might be able to help." Her voice calm, yet carrying a quiet strength that momentarily unsettled the CEO, who sneered in response, clearly irritated by what he perceived as insolence, and barked again. "Then call him, quickly," while the factory workers exchanged glances, sensing that this moment was more than just a simple machine breakdown, that beneath the surface tensions and hierarchies lay stories of resilience, pride and unspoken truths that even a man like Holston had yet to fully comprehend, all as the sweltering afternoon stretched on and the fate of the stalled conveyor, and perhaps much more, hung delicately in the balance. Within the hour, the distant rumble of an old blue pickup truck echoed through the vast expanse surrounding the Altera Foods plant, breaking the tense silence that had settled over the stalled machinery and restless workers, the vehicle making its way along a dusty gravel road framed by rows of swaying cornstalks and tall whispering pines, the sun dipping lower in the sky and casting long shadows across the fields as the driver approached the factory entrance, drawing curious glances from employees who had never seen such a rugged truck pull up to the front gates of the corporate facility, a vehicle that spoke not of corporate power, but of humble, enduring roots in the soil. As the truck came to a halt near the factory's main loading dock, the door creaked open, and out stepped a tall man whose presence seemed to command the earth itself, his weathered boots crunching firmly on the gravel, a worn felt hat pulled low over his brow, shielding eyes that had seen decades of sunrises and hardships, and in his measured, deliberate movements there was a quiet dignity born from years of working with the land rather than behind a desk. This was Jeremiah Briggs, the man known to some as Naomi's father, but to the world of agriculture, a figure of subtle power and influence whose story was deeply woven into the very fabric of the community, a black farmer who had, against all odds and systemic barriers, risen to own vast tracts of land that once belonged to his ancestors, his legacy whispered in fields of cotton and corn that stretched as far as the eye could see. As he strode toward the plant, CEO Richard Holston's eyes narrowed, his posture stiffening with a mixture of suspicion and something like disdain, his polished shoes clicking sharply against the factory floor as he regarded the man with thinly veiled skepticism, ready to dismiss him as just another country bumpkin who didn't belong in this high-stakes world of corporate agribusiness. But before he could speak, Jeremiah raised a strong, steady hand in greeting and said simply, Jeremiah, Naomi's father. "I hear you've got a problem," his voice calm but resonant, carrying the weight of experience and the unspoken history of generations who had fought and endured. And the factory fell into a hush as the employees watched the interaction unfold. At that moment, a floor manager hurried over to Holston, urgency etched into his features as he leaned close and whispered words that caused the CEO's confident facade to falter and his face to pale. "That's Mr. Jeremiah Briggs." "The manager said quietly. "He's not just her father. He owns this land and the supply contracts that keep this factory running." And with those words, a shift rippled through the air, the invisible power dynamics twisting as Holston's arrogance cracked like fragile glass under pressure, revealing a man suddenly aware that he was no longer the one holding all the cards. And for the first time, he saw Jeremiah not as a mere farmer or mechanic, but as a formidable force whose roots dug deeper than the foundations of the plant itself. Jeremiah, unbothered by the CEO's sudden change in demeanor, walked confidently over to the broken machine, his eyes scanning every gear and lever with the practiced ease of a man who understood machines as extensions of the Earth's own rhythm. And without a word of complaint, he knelt down, tools in hand, inviting Naomi to join him as they prepared to breathe life back into the heart of the factory. And the gathered workers exchanged glances, sensing that this moment marked the beginning of something far larger than a simple repair, a reckoning of respect, history, and power that had long been ignored, but could no longer be denied in the sunlit heat of a Georgia afternoon. As Jeremiah and Naomi worked side by side to realign the stubborn conveyor belt, their hands steady and skilled, despite the sweat glistening on their brows under the harsh factory lights, the workers nearby began to gather in small clusters, their whispers and murmurs weaving a tapestry of stories and memories that had long been kept beneath the surface, like roots in the earth. Tales of a man who was far more than just a farmer or a mechanic fixing machines on a summer day. For Jeremiah, Briggs was a living testament to perseverance and quiet revolution, a son of sharecroppers who had inherited not just the soil, but the weight of history and the burden of systemic injustice. Yet with relentless grit and an unyielding vision, he had spent more than 2 decades slowly, methodically reclaiming the very land that his ancestors had labored on under the cruel shadows of segregation and poverty, buying back piece by piece with hard-earned money, negotiating contracts and investing in the latest agricultural technology that transformed tired fields into vibrant expanses of organic crops that now fed not only the local community, but supplied Altera Foods' most premium product lines that brought in millions of dollars and depended utterly on his careful stewardship and unrelenting work ethic, a fact that few in the cold, glass-walled corporate offices seemed to acknowledge or even recognize, as Jeremiah remained a humble, grounded figure who shunned the spotlight, preferring the quiet dignity of his land and the satisfaction of honest labor over fame or accolades, a man whose hands bore the calluses and scars of decades spent coaxing life from unforgiving soil, whose eyes held the wisdom of someone who had seen the cyclical nature of struggle and triumph, and who understood deeply that true power was cultivated in patience and respect for the earth, while Naomi, watching her father with a mixture of pride and quiet admiration, was never surprised by his unshakable humility or the lessons he imparted in his gentle but firm way, lessons about the value of hard work, the importance of dignity in every task no matter how small, and the unbreakable bond between people and the land that sustains them. Lessons she had shared just moments earlier with a young factory employee who looked on with newfound respect. As Naomi explained softly, "He taught me to never be ashamed of getting your hands dirty," words that echoed the deeper truth of their family's journey and the legacy they carried forward. A legacy that was not just about ownership or business success, but about reclaiming identity, rewriting narratives, and forging a future where respect and equity could finally grow alongside the crops nourished by Jeremiah's steady hands and unwavering spirit. While around them, the murmurs of the workers shifted from curiosity to admiration, a recognition dawning that the man repairing the machine was not merely a fixer of metal and gears, but a symbol of resilience, hope, and the transformative power of rootedness. A reminder that beneath the polished surface of corporate profit lay the raw, vital force of communities that sustained those profits. communities whose stories were often unheard until today, when the clatter of a broken conveyor belt led to a reckoning, a reawakening, and the quiet assertion that true strength comes not from titles or suits, but from the soil, the sweat, and the generations who have toiled to make a better tomorrow, all culminating in a moment of profound connection that bridged past and present, labor and legacy, father and daughter. As the machine hummed back to life under Jeremiah's steady hands and Naomi's watchful gaze, signaling not just the end of a mechanical failure, but the beginning of a new chapter in the story of Altera, foods and the land it relied upon, a chapter where respect and recognition would finally start to take root, alongside the crops that fed a nation. The machine groaned, creaked, and then, with a steady, reassuring hum, it began to whirl back to life, the conveyor belt slowly moving again, as if awakening from a long slumber, lights flickering and gears spinning smoothly beneath Jeremiah's skilled hands, who finally stood upright, wiping the grime and sweat from his palms onto his worn jeans as he glanced toward the anxious crowd gathered around. His expression calm yet edged with quiet authority, and with a slight shake of his head he declared, "Simple misalignment," his voice carrying the weight of experience, "happens when no one listens to the people doing the real work." A pointed remark that hung in the charged air like a truth long ignored, but impossible to dismiss. And CEO Richard Hulston, who had been standing stiffly nearby, suddenly found himself stumbling over words in an awkward attempt at apology, his voice faltering as he said, "Mr. Briggs, I didn't know—" But before he could finish, Jeremiah's piercing gaze locked onto him, eyes steady and unwavering, and with deliberate clarity he said, "You didn't care to know." The bluntness of the statement cutting through the room like a sharpened blade, leaving Halston momentarily speechless, his usual confidence rattled by the undeniable truth. And then Jeremiah turned to Naomi, his daughter, the young woman who had stood her ground moments before and whose presence had changed the course of the day, and asked, "You ready to go?" Naomi nodded firmly, though she paused, a thoughtful look crossing her face as she turned back to face the now silenced crowd and, with a steady voice, added, "Before we do, can I speak to HR about the way your CEO talks to staff?" Her words bold and unyielding, carrying the collective weight of the workers who had witnessed the entire ordeal, and as the employees exchanged knowing smiles and subtle nods, Halston's face flushed, a flush that spread from his cheeks down to his neck, betraying the embarrassment and the dawning realization that the old ways of dismissing, belittling, and commanding without respect were no longer acceptable. And as Naomi and Jeremiah walked out together, side by side, the atmosphere in the factory floor seemed to shift palpably. The air charged not just with the hum of repaired machinery, but with a newfound sense of dignity and recognition, as if respect had just been plowed deep into the very concrete beneath their feet, sowing seeds that would grow into change, that would remind everyone there, worker and executive alike, that true strength, progress, and prosperity come from honoring those who do the real work, from listening to voices too long ignored, and from standing together, rooted firmly in the soil of justice, equality, and shared humanity, a profound transformation born from a broken machine and a simple act of repair that resonated far beyond the walls of the factory, into the fields, communities, and hearts of all who called that land home.